The yacht rocked gently against the waves, the kind of soft sway that lulled most into a complacent daze. Not me. I stood at the edge of the deck, gripping the polished railing with knuckles white, feeling the salt spray sting my skin, and thinking about how invisible I had always been in this family. The sun split the horizon in streaks of molten gold, but I barely noticed, my mind spinning faster than the tide. "Always the quiet one," my father had said last week, passing by me as though I were air. His gold cufflinks catching the sunlight but never his eyes catching mine. "Always in the shadows," my mother whispered later. Her voice a silky lull of disappointment that never reached my ears until it was too late. Shadows. That was my label. The overlooked daughter. The one who smiled too softly, spoke too little, who learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny to her. I had learned to exist around them, never through them. But tonight, on this glimmering vessel that everyone called a home but I always felt like a cage, something in me stirred. Maybe it was the way the waves clashed quietly against the hull, a reminder that even stillness carried energy beneath. Maybe it was the glance I caught of my reflection in the glass doors of the lounge, a face familiar yet alien, eyes sharp, determined, restless. Something told me I didn't belong in shadows. I belonged to the currents, the hidden ones, the ones that could pull beneath the surface and change direction without warning. I walked the length of the deck, feeling the wood under my feet, each step a tiny declaration I hadn't voiced yet. The yacht's lights blinked lazily along the railings, casting shadows that played across my face like a secret script only I could read. The crew didn't notice me. The guests, my family, none of them did. That invisibility had been my cloak for years. But cloaks could burn. They could catch fire from the smallest spark. And inside me, something was starting to smolder. I remembered the last family dinner, the one where my brother toasted himself and my father nodded with approval, while I sipped my wine and practiced disappearing. I had mastered the art of fading, of smiling politely, of never cracking the bubble that kept me, the quiet one. But mastery comes with a price. Silence builds a reservoir, and I was ready to release it. I leaned against the railing, letting the wind whip my hair into my eyes, and breathed in deeply. Every inhalation was a reminder that I was alive, that I existed. And then it hit me. My power wasn't in being loud. It was in being calculated, patient, observant. I had spent years watching them, learning their habits, their little hypocrisies, the invisible cracks that ran through their perfect surfaces. Every laugh, every toast, every congratulatory pat on the back. Now they were data points, little breadcrumbs leading me somewhere. Somewhere I had never allowed myself to dream. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, and I felt a pulse of urgency. This yacht, this family, this legacy, it wasn't something I was going to inherit passively. It was something I would have to take carefully, cleverly. I let my fingers trail along the railing, imagining the trajectory of my life like a ship charted across waters. I could navigate it, I could command it. And maybe tonight was the beginning of my first course correction. I thought about the hidden corridors, the locked doors, the conversations I had overheard behind closed lounge doors. Secrets lived there, breathing and waiting, and I had a mind that could remember everything. Every whispered deal, every fleeting look of disdain or favoritism. Those were the weapons no one suspected I possessed. I smiled, the first real smile in a long time, the one that tasted like fire and ice together. I wasn't just the shadow anymore. I was the current moving beneath the waves, unseen but unstoppable. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. "You're ready. You know what to do." No signature. No hint. My heart skipped. Who sent it? Did it matter? Maybe it was just a reminder I had been needing, a signal that my intuition had already whispered. It's time. Time to step out of the shadows, time to break patterns, time to carve a space that was mine. My pulse accelerated. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, letting the words echo inside me like a beat I could feel in my chest. The water lapped gently, a rhythm that matched my own. I closed my eyes and pictured it, walking into the main lounge, confronting the lies and favoritism, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement. Not with yelling, not with anger, but with a calm intensity that could unsettle anyone who had underestimated me. My fingers tightened around the railing again, not with fear, but with anticipation. The invisible currents beneath me were gathering strength, and soon they would surge forward. I opened my eyes and scanned the horizon one last time before heading below deck. The shadows I had lived in so long didn't frighten me. They sharpened me. I was ready to start charting a new course, mapping a territory I had been told wasn't mine. Every step I took down the polished stairs was a step toward revelation, toward challenge, toward reclaiming what had always been quietly mine in potential. Tonight I would begin. I would observe. I would listen. I would learn. And then, I would act. The yacht hummed softly around me, the hidden currents of its engines and the sea blending into one persistent pulse. I could feel it. I was connected now. Not just to the ship, not just to the family, but to something stronger, something fierce that had been waiting for its moment. And my moment was here. The first spark had been lit. The quiet daughter had awakened. And the waves whispered promises only I could hear. Claim your throne. Move with the tide. Let them see you rise. I exhaled slowly, tasting salt and freedom. My story was no longer written by them. Tonight the currents would bend to me. The library smelled of polished wood and old money, thick with the weight of secrets. Every book, every folder, every leather-bound ledger whispered in a language only a patient observer could hear. I moved quietly, gliding past shelves that had sheltered generations, each step measured, deliberate. The yacht's lounge above was filled with laughter and clinking glasses, the world thinking I was somewhere else, somewhere irrelevant, perfect. They never knew the kind of predator I could be when unseen. I had memorized the patterns. My father's habit of leaving sensitive documents in the library when he thought no one was paying attention. My mother's tendency to scribble notes on the margins of contracts, thinking her children weren't curious. And my brother. Oh, my brother, with his careless arrogance, leaving paper trails that screamed weakness to anyone who could read between the lines. I'd been watching, waiting. Tonight those habits would betray them. I pulled a drawer open, letting the sound be swallowed by the hum of the yacht. Inside were folders stacked neatly, each labeled with years and initials that meant nothing to the casual observer, everything to me. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the paper's texture, the embossed logos, the silent weight of authority. This was my battlefield and these were my weapons. I found the first folder I had been waiting for. The contracts, the transfers, the hidden agreements that decided who got what in ways that had never included me. My pulse quickened. The handwriting was familiar. My mother's precise loops, my father's angular insistence, my brother's scrawled overconfidence. And then, tucked beneath it all, a note I hadn't expected. A ledger with transactions that made my blood run hot with indignation and possibility. They thought they could obscure the truth behind signatures and ink, but they hadn't counted on someone who had learned to read the spaces between. I flipped through the pages like a thief of history, each line a revelation. Certain deals had been hidden from me for years. Certain privileges, certain inheritances, quietly siphoned away. And suddenly, the entire family narrative shifted in my mind. Every compliment I hadn't received, every glance of dismissal, they weren't oversights. They were deliberate. They had assumed I would remain silent. They had assumed I would stay in the shadows. I let a slow smile curl across my lips. They had underestimated me. They always did. And now, armed with evidence, I could plan. Could maneuver. I could play the game better than they ever imagined. The yacht creaked above me as laughter spilled from the lounge. My brother's voice floated down, arrogant, unaware. He believed in his invincibility, in the bubble of approval that had insulated him all his life. I believed in something else. I believed in the quiet patience that could turn observation into leverage, evidence into power. I gathered the folders, stacking them carefully, the edges aligned like chess pieces ready for movement. This was the first stage collection. Knowledge was power, and tonight I was accumulating it in spades. Every ledger, every scribbled note, every overlooked signature would become part of the story I was about to rewrite. But it wasn't just about documents. It was about patterns. I traced the timelines, connecting dots across years, noticing how certain decisions coincided with my own exclusions, how certain privileges passed to my brother without scrutiny. The deeper I dug, the clearer the narrative became. This family, so polished on the surface, thrived on exclusion, on maintaining an image, on protecting hierarchies that never favored me. And that narrative, it was about to fracture. I paused at a folder marked with my initials. Odd, out of place. Inside were letters addressed to me, never sent. Drafts of apologies, explanations, acknowledgments that had been intercepted or ignored. My father's awkward attempts at recognition, my mother's conflicted hand, my brother's reluctant concessions, all halted before reaching me. And in those unsent words I found fuel. Fuel not for revenge alone but for reclamation. I was no longer a passive recipient of neglect. I was a strategist, a curator of evidence, a force unseen. The library's shadows seemed to lean closer, welcoming me, affirming me. This was my domain now, if only for this night. The yacht above could continue to shimmer in its golden light, the conversations full of laughter and ignorance. I was underground, weaving a tapestry of truths that would later explode into revelation. Hours passed. The piles of paper grew. My fingers were smudged with ink, my mind alive with calculations and imaginings. Each discovery was a note in the symphony of change I was composing. I could almost hear the beat, the rhythm of justice, the cadence of confrontation, the bass line of my own ascent. And then I found it. The folder that mattered most. Hidden behind layers of innocuous contracts, the document that could tip the scales entirely. My father's signature on a transfer that explicitly denied me an asset I had every right to claim. My brother's casual notes, meant to justify it, now reading like a confession. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, or perhaps it was my pulse. This was the turning point. One piece of evidence and everything could change. I stood in the dim light, stacking folders with deliberate care. My mind raced. The confrontation hadn't yet begun, but the pieces were in place. I could feel it, the tension, the anticipation, the hidden currents beneath the surface, waiting for me to activate them. I wasn't just collecting documents. I was collecting power, assembling the blueprint for the challenge I would soon unleash. The yacht's engines hummed as it drifted through the night, but I felt something else. A current of inevitability. My moment was approaching. The quiet daughter, the overlooked one, the shadow in the corners of rooms and conversations. I was about to step into the light, armed with facts they couldn't dismiss, evidence they couldn't deny. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of realization sink in. The game had changed. The balance had shifted. And the family that had assumed my compliance would soon learn that the most dangerous moves were made not in noise, but in silence, in patience, in precision. Tonight the paper trails would guide me. Tonight I would start to unravel the story they had written without me. And tomorrow I would begin to write my own. The yacht gleamed under the midday sun, polished and pristine, a floating palace of privilege. Guests milled about, oblivious to the storm brewing quietly beneath the calm surface. And there I was, standing at the threshold of the lounge, every nerve alert, every heartbeat in sync with the pulse of ambition. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for. The first step of reclaiming what had always been quietly mine. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of teakwood and salt fill my lungs, grounding me. My fingers brushed the brass handle of the lounge door. Behind it, laughter and clinking glasses, the same careless rhythms that had always excluded me. But today nothing would be the same. Today I wasn't the shadow. Today I was the tide rising beneath their feet. The door opened and I stepped in. Eyes turned, a brief flicker of recognition, then dismissal. My father, seated at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow, as if testing whether I belonged there. My brother smirked, confident as ever, assuming I would fade into the background like I always had. My mother's gaze was cool, measured, almost amused. All of them thought they understood me. They thought they had mastered me. I moved with a calm precision, taking the nearest chair, seating myself deliberately. Not submissively. Not apologetically. Deliberately. Every gesture calculated, every glance purposeful. I let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that makes others squirm, the kind that forces recognition without a word. "Late night in the library?" my father asked, trying to mask curiosity with casual tone. I smiled, slow, deliberate. "Research," I said. The word carried weight, promise, and challenge all at once. My brother leaned back, confident, unshaken. "Research? On what?" I pulled a folder from my bag, letting it thump onto the table. A sound sharper than words, a punctuation mark that drew attention. I opened it carefully, revealing the first of the documents I had uncovered. The contracts, the ledgers, the notes that mapped years of exclusion and favoritism. I watched their expressions shift subtly, recognition creeping in, unease masking their initial amusement. "Interesting," I said softly. "Seems there are decisions here that weren't exactly transparent. Decisions that affected me directly." My father cleared his throat, a faint attempt to assert authority. "Everything here is." I cut him off with a glance, calm but sharp. "Everything here is exactly what I need to understand. I've been patient. I've been quiet. I've observed. And now I see it clearly." My brother laughed, dismissive, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What are you planning to do with that?" I leaned forward, fingers resting on the folder. "I'm planning to start claiming what's mine. Step by step. With precision. No theatrics. No noise. Just facts, evidence, and clarity." The room shifted subtly. The air changed. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, a warning. My father's jaw tightened, an attempt at control. But the momentum was mine. The currents beneath the surface had risen, and they were carrying me forward. I opened another folder, revealing documents that tied decisions to favoritism, contracts that had intentionally excluded me, and ledgers that painted a picture of deliberate oversight. Every page I laid down was a declaration, a quiet but unyielding assertion of power. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about acknowledgement, transparency, understanding the rules that were set without me, and correcting them." Silence stretched across the table, the kind of tense pause that holds power. My father looked at me, assessing, weighing, realizing that the daughter he had assumed would remain invisible had transformed into someone capable of commanding attention without shouting. My brother's smirk faltered. My mother studied me as though seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet daughter, not as a shadow, but as a strategist. I pushed a few more folders toward the center, letting them form a path. "I've collected these," I continued. "And I've connected the dots. Every decision, every exclusion, every hidden transfer. I know the patterns now. And I'm ready to step into my place, not as an afterthought, but as a rightful part of this family, this legacy, this yacht." My father shifted, uncomfortable, realizing the confrontation wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, but precise, methodical. My brother fidgeted, uneasy, sensing the shift in dynamics he hadn't anticipated. My mother's hands rested calmly on the table, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, recognition sparking behind the calm surface. I took a breath, letting the moment sink in, letting the weight of the folders and the truth behind them fill the room. "This is not a threat," I said. "This is clarity. And clarity is power." The room didn't explode with reaction. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst. But the currents had shifted. The yacht that had seemed like a floating fortress of control, of inherited authority and favoritism, now felt fragile. I had stepped aboard not as a visitor, not as a shadow, but as someone who had mapped every corner, understood every pattern, and was ready to play the game on my terms. I closed the last folder with deliberate force, the sound echoing in the lounge like a final beat in a rhythm only I could conduct. "The next step," I said softly, letting the words linger, "is seeing how far these patterns can hold against someone who knows them inside and out. Tomorrow we test boundaries. The day after we redefine them. I've learned the rules. Now I'm ready to bend them." I rose from my chair, letting the weight of my presence settle in the room. Every eye followed me, some reluctantly, some with curiosity, all with an unspoken acknowledgement. The quiet daughter had boarded the throne. Not with noise, not with fury, but with preparation, patience, and precision. I walked toward the deck, letting the sun wash over me, feeling the yacht beneath my feet, feeling the hidden currents that had always existed, now coursing in tandem with my own resolve. I was no longer in the shadows. I was moving with intent. And the family that had underestimated me would soon learn that calm, calculated presence could be far more dangerous than rage. The tide whispered against the hull. The currents hummed beneath the surface. And I, finally, had boarded my throne. The yacht shimmered under a low sun, gilding every polished surface in gold, but I barely noticed. My mind wasn't on the reflection of light. It was on the reflection of power. I had stepped into the lounge before, carefully, like a shadow testing its boundaries. Today I stepped in like a storm. Every step a declaration. Every glance a ripple. Every word a strike. The family gathered, as they always did, in that familiar formation of assumed dominance. My father at the head, my mother poised beside him, my brother leaning back with that smug confidence that had once been untouchable. They looked at me, and for the first time they weren't sure what they were seeing. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for acknowledgement. I began speaking, not quietly, not angrily, but with precision, rhythm, cadence. I laid out the evidence I had collected, the patterns I had traced, the exclusions I had endured. Every folder, every page, every detail was a drumbeat of inevitability. "This," I said, sliding a folder toward my father, "isn't a complaint. It's clarity. And clarity is not optional." My brother scoffed, but I caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. My mother's hands remained folded, but her gaze was sharp, calculating, assessing the strategy, not just the words. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but the air had shifted. The currents had changed direction. I laid out the ledger that proved the asset transfers, the contracts that had been signed without my input, the subtle manipulations that favored my brother. Each revelation was a calculated move, a break in the pattern, a crack in the structure they had assumed unbreakable. "I've read every line," I continued. "Every decision made without me. And now I'm rewriting the rules. Not for revenge. Not for chaos. But because I exist. And existence demands recognition." My voice carried over the room, not shouting, but resonant, rhythmic, almost musical. Every word landed with weight, every pause deliberate. They were caught in the cadence of someone who had learned the rhythm of patience, and then converted it into force. My father opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "No explanations. No justifications. Not tonight. Tonight we acknowledge. Tomorrow we adjust. You may have thought the script was written without me. You were wrong." My brother shifted, uncomfortable, trying to regain composure. "And what do you propose?" To reclaim what's rightfully mine," I said, calm, unwavering. Step by step. Not with noise. Not with theatrics. But with precision. Evidence. Strategy. Intention. I let a beat pass. The weight of silence pressed down on the room. My mother's eyes flickered to my father. A silent conversation of recognition. The rules they had lived by, the hierarchy they had maintained, were under challenge. And I was the agent of that disruption. I moved to the central table, spreading the folders out like a map of the territory I was claiming. Every page was a territory, every signature a boundary. I wasn't demanding, they were irrelevant. I was asserting methodically, irreversibly. This, I said, tapping the table with calm authority, is not about anger. It's about existence, visibility, ownership. You taught me patience, observation, and calculation. Now I'm teaching you respect. The room was tense, every breath measured. My father's jaw tightened. My brother's smirk faltered. My mother leaned forward slightly, assessing. The current I had unleashed beneath their feet was palpable. They had assumed I would remain quiet, that my presence was optional. They were learning that currents, once stirred, cannot be ignored. I stood, letting the folders rest as a silent declaration. My eyes swept the room, taking in every reaction, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. The next phase, I said softly, letting the words linger, is action. Not confrontation without purpose. Not chaos without design. But the careful dismantling of a structure that assumed I would stay in the shadows. That ends tonight. My father finally spoke, voice low, measured. And you think you can change everything with papers and words? I smiled, the calm kind that hides a storm. I think I can change the narrative. And once the narrative changes, the rules bend. And the rules have always been mine to understand. I just waited until I was ready to act. My brother shifted again, more visibly unsettled. My mother's hands rested on the table, her fingers steepled, eyes sharp. Even in their power, they were learning that the quiet daughter had evolved. The one they underestimated. The one they dismissed. I walked toward the deck, letting the sun wash over me, letting the yacht hum beneath my feet, feeling the currents that had always existed now flowing in rhythm with my resolve. Every step was deliberate. Every glance calculated. Every heartbeat synchronized with the momentum I had built. The yacht shimmered, the family tense, the world outside ignorant. But inside the rules had changed. I had broken the script. I had shifted the currents. And the legacy they thought untouchable now had my hand on its course. I paused at the railing, looking at the horizon. The water was calm, deceptively so, like the old family structure. But currents ran beneath, unseen and unstoppable. And I was those currents now. I was movement, change, force, and strategy. I had boarded my throne, and now I was ready to command it fully. The first step was complete. The confrontation had been precise, controlled, undeniable. The next steps would be execution. Consolidation. Claiming not just acknowledgement but dominance, not through noise, not through rage, but through strategic mastery. The tide whispered against the hull, the waves carrying a rhythm only I could hear. And I knew, the quiet daughter had risen, the currents had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun fell softly on the yacht, gilding every polished surface with warmth, not arrogance. The world above deck was quiet, almost reverent, as if it sensed a shift. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step measured, each breath carrying a calm I had earned through nights of observation, research, and confrontation. The chaos of disruption had passed, leaving space for clarity, for presence, for ownership. The lounge was empty now, the remnants of yesterday's tension lingering in the polished air. I spread the folders across the central table once more, but this time not as weapons, not as instruments of challenge. They were maps of understanding, blueprints of the future, archives of lessons learned. I touched the edges of the pages lightly, a tactile acknowledgement of the battles fought in silence, of currents traced beneath calm waters. The first to arrive was my mother. She moved toward me slowly, her expression unreadable but softened by something I had earned: recognition. She did not sit, did not offer excuses. She simply observed, and in that quiet observation lay acknowledgement. "You've done what I thought impossible," she said softly. Not praise, not defeat, recognition. And in those few words, the weight of years lifted slightly from my shoulders. He nodded. It wasn't impossible. It was necessary. I had to understand before I could step forward. I had to navigate the currents before I could claim my place. My father appeared next, a slow, deliberate presence. He regarded me, no longer with the detached authority of the head of a family, but with a cautious respect. "You've changed the landscape," he admitted. "I can see that now. You're not just part of it, you shape it." I smiled, calm, confident. "I shape it by acknowledging it, by understanding it, by refusing to remain a shadow. The table is mine to step to, yes. But the legacy is something we can define together." My brother lingered at the threshold, still wary, still unbalanced by the shifts of the previous days. But the edge of arrogance was gone. In its place was awareness, a subtle recognition that the quiet daughter, once underestimated, once ignored, was now a force that demanded space. "So what now?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. "Now," I said, leaning slightly over the table, letting the morning light illuminate my presence. "We redefine what this family can be. We acknowledge what was hidden, we adjust what was unequal, and we operate with transparency. We preserve the legacy, but we make it ours, together, equally, consciously." The currents of tension and suspicion still lingered, but beneath them ran something stronger: possibility. A new rhythm. A new cadence. The yacht itself seemed to breathe differently, the polished wood and salt air vibrating with the energy of change. I had claimed my space, but more importantly, I had opened the door for others to see, to participate, to grow alongside me rather than in opposition. I moved to the edge of the deck, letting the sun warm my face, feeling the gentle sway of the yacht beneath my feet. The water mirrored the sky, calm but deep, the hidden current still alive, reminding me that power was not static. It was movement, adaptability, flow. And now I was fluent in it. I could read it, ride it, and direct it. The family gathered behind me slowly, hesitantly at first, then with a quiet confidence that mirrored my own. We did not need words to declare unity. Our acknowledgement of each other's presence, each other's right to the table, spoke louder than any declaration ever could. We had broken the script, yes, but now we were writing a new one. Together. I took my seat at the central table, the one I had always imagined but never claimed until now. It felt solid beneath me, real, legitimate. I glanced at each of them in turn. My mother, poised and perceptive. My father, measured and thoughtful. My brother, still cautious but now aware. And I knew, this wasn't about domination. It was about presence, clarity, and legacy. The folders lay before me, their weight a reminder of battles fought and knowledge gained. But they were no longer instruments of challenge. They were instruments of understanding. And as I traced a finger over a ledger, a document that had once represented exclusion, I realized it was also a symbol of transformation. What was once withheld could now be acknowledged, reshaped, integrated into the fabric of who we were as a family. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm of the yacht beneath me, the pulse of water against hull, the heartbeat of generations converging in this space. I had moved through observation, discovery, confrontation, and disruption. Now I moved into harmony, into leadership not defined by noise, but by intention, presence, and clarity. When I opened my eyes, the room was quiet, not from fear, but from respect. The currents beneath us had shifted, yes, but now they carried us forward together. And in that forward motion I found something rare: balance. The kind of balance that comes from understanding, from strategy, from stepping fully into the space you were meant to occupy. The yacht drifted, the sun climbed higher, and I felt the power of legacy reshaped. Not through domination but through presence. My presence. Our presence. The table was ours now. The currents, once hidden, now flowed in harmony with intention. The script was no longer broken. It was rewritten, thoughtfully, deliberately, unapologetically. I exhaled, the salt air filling my lungs, and smiled. This was more than triumph. It was resolution. It was clarity. It was the acknowledgement that power isn't seized in noise or anger. It's claimed through understanding, through strategy, and through the courage to step fully into your own legacy. The yacht rocked gently, the water reflecting the sky, the horizon endless and open. And I finally had found my place. Not in shadows, not in whispers, but at the table, in command of my currents, shaping the legacy that would carry forward long after today. The family stood beside me now.